Good morning and welcome to the latest edition of the Future Media podcast. Today, I'm seeking to answer the single most important question in global news media today. Google promised that its new AI overviews replacement for search would send publishers more traffic, but did it? Given that 4 in 5 global publishers rely for 90% of their ad revenue on Google, that's an existential question. So did Google tell the truth, or did it lie again in its relentless pursuit of publisher revenues? This is where we're going to find out. So today, I'm joined by Alan Chappell, the host of the Monopoly Report, renowned privacy lawyer and ad tech aficionado, and trusted advisor to multiple media giants around the world. And also by a friend of Future Media, Lawrence O'Toole from the global SEO analysis firm Authoritas. Lawrence has spent 20 years as a Google whisperer, that's what I've decided to call you now, analysing how the world's default search engine works and how it monetizes or otherwise for thousands of firms. Mid last year, I joined Authoritas as well as the Daily Mail, the UK's Trinity Mirror, Hearst, Press Gazette and MI3 in Australia to do the first assessment of the impact of AI overviews and the damage that it would have on premium web traffic and revenue. That landmark study set a baseline for searches on news articles and products across more than 3,000 keywords, which remains the benchmark today for many publishers. So now we're back for an update and to share some new insights on the future of search might be headed and where the ad-funded open web might be going as Google doubles down on a future where it keeps more of the traffic and shares less of the spoils. So that's all we're going to do. So let's get to it. Lawrence, welcome back. Great to see you again.
Thanks, Ricky. Great to be here. Alan, great to be here with you.
All right. So, Lawrence, Google's repeatedly claimed on stage that AI Overviews is going to deliver more traffic to publishers. It feels a perfect time. It's a year now. We should test that promise. What are you seeing in the market? What's the data showing you?
Well, I think I could pretty much say I don't think that is the case. And certainly it's not what I'm hearing, and it's not what I've been hearing from SEOs worldwide for the last 12 months or so. And Google has now rolled out AI overviews to 100 countries. I mean, it's properly rolled it out to anonymous users. You don't have to be logged into a Google account in the US. In other markets, it seems what should we say, in its infancy in terms of rollout. So I don't think we've even seen the full effect of AI overviews yet. And obviously it's not even appearing in Europe at all at the moment, which is another question entirely. So anecdotally, clients are saying they're seeing losses of revenue. But Google are, what should we say, they're not being that helpful in trying to make useful data information available to help us. So normally through Google Search Console, our clients would rely on that data to try and understand what clicks, what impressions, what the click-through rate is to the keywords and to their pages that matter to them. But Google has explicitly said they're not going to break out that data. And so if you rank in the AI overviews, they give everything in the AI overviews the same position 1. And if you're hidden and then you're scrolled into view, you're also position 1. So this has a big impact on the data that people can get at. And you really need to dig deep and mash up that data with other data like our AIO rank tracker, for example, to try and bring that data together to pull some insights together. And we've done that, and we've done that through private studies for a number of publishers now. And where we have done that, what we found is if a SERP has got an AI overview, then the click-through rate to a site is a lot lower than it is for a SERP where they don't have an AI overview. So approximately 50% lower, and probably more on mobile. So so we're seeing data here that says to us that's not really the case. And when you look at Google's earnings calls, and if you heard their recent earnings call the other day, they're very specific when it comes to revenues and margins and capex. And this went up by 8% or 10% or whatever it was. But when it comes to specifics around user metrics for their flagship product, they are particularly vague. And you'll hear, Sundar, the CEO, talk about healthy metrics and, user satisfaction being good, and users asking more questions over a period of time. So all these things are a little bit woolly, which makes me question. And obviously, that's the kind of things that we like to do, which we like to dig into the data, question whether what they're saying is really true, or whether they're mincing their words slightly to try and give the impression that they're going to deliver more traffic to publishers when in reality they're not.
So Google's probably the company most famous in the world for data, right? So they should be pretty good at it. They built their entire business on data, but they have been pinged at the antitrust trial for being opaque on the numbers when it suits them. Okay. Do you think we're seeing a bit of this, Alan? Do you think that's what we're seeing a little bit of here? What's your commentary?
Yeah, I mean, Google is almost never going to want to reveal exactly where they're going as they play their version of 3D chess. And so they're vague in part to create optionality on their end so that regardless of how things turn out, they can point to a couple of data points that happened, 3, 6, 9 months ago and say, see, this is what we meant all along. And some of that is because there is clearly a plan. We may not be, privy to what the plan is, but there's certainly a plan there that they're not disclosing. But I don't want to entirely discount the possibility that they don't know exactly where things are going either, and that there's a whole bunch of political infighting there. I can certainly speak to, fighting going on between the browser world and the ads world within Google. And then all of that, I think, overlay to, give me a pun in here early, to throw another, thing on top of this is that they don't seem to be super interested in driving the types of behaviors that got them to the place where they are today.
Yeah,
they really are cutting off, what some of us call the open web, the ad supported internet, and they're doing that in favor of their own first party properties.
Yeah, and their income, right? Which is all about their first party properties. I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit about that. Can I just come back to you quickly, Lawrence, on publishers' lived experiences? What are they actually seeing? When you say that Google search traffic might be down 50%, they rely very, very heavily, clearly, on search for traffic. What's the actual impact on those internally in terms of their viewers and their revenue potential?
Well, I think it's difficult to say that search traffic is down 50%. And we're seeing certainly a trend where people are complaining of drops of 30, 40%, etc. But what we're seeing is where AI overviews appear in the SERPs, then the expected click-through rate that you would normally get from that SERP result is going to drop by the order of 40 to 50%. Now, the question is, at the moment, AI overviews are only appearing for a fraction of traffic, and that varies. So it might be as high as 30% in our weekly data in the US, and it might be as low as a couple of percentage points in the UK. But it depends on the nature of the keywords and the nature of your business. If you're a business publishing health, you're a health publisher publishing content, then you can expect to see a 50 to 60% penetration of AI overviews. And in that example, I would expect your traffic to drop by an order of 50 to 60%, because if you were ranking number one before organically in a SERP that didn't have an AI overview, now Google puts an AI overview there. Even if you're listed in the AI overview, your expected click-through rate is going to drop by that order of magnitude. And so I think that's the sort of the nuance there, because really what I'm saying here is the worst is yet to come. Because we may have seen some impact. If you've seen some impact on revenues already, then it's only going to get worse, as Google has stated just the other day, that they're going to expand the number of queries that they are going to show AI overviews for. And we saw that when we did our analysis when SGE was in beta, that they were showing AI overview results for news queries like top stories and news headlines today, and local results, and many more e-commerce queries. So really it's still in its infancy, because it's mainly focused still on sort of informational commercial research queries, and it's really starting to get to where the money's at, and it's just it's just a question of time. So I think for publishers, obviously, right now, if they look at the keywords that are appearing for AI overviews, they might well be longer tail keywords with fewer impressions. And so the impact may not be as marked now as it is going to be in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. And maybe even that time scale's too conservative because, Sundar's already said it's going to be an innovative, transformational year for search. You're going to see more change than ever before. So I think this is going to move faster than we even possibly think. And I think people are going to get a wake-up call. And they might realise their revenues are impacted when it's too late for them to do anything about it.
It wouldn't be the first time that's happened.
And the message is for regulators, not just for publishers, because things are moving so quickly. How do they keep up? The damage is done before they're even onto it. So it's difficult to talk specifically to revenues because obviously lots of our clients will keep those numbers close to their chests. But I think there's concern. And I think that concern will move from concern to grave concern at some point when the penetration rate, increases to a level and to a breadth of keywords that cover many more commercial and transactional and revenue-oriented terms.
Well, there'd be no technical reason for them not to expand further and further and further. This is clearly the route they're taking. I don't think it's easy to U-turn from here.
Well, I suppose they've got to monetize these AI overviews. And we talked earlier about them being woolly. It was quite interesting. I think is it Philip Schneider that he was on the call there, SVP of business. And he, again, very specific about revenue growth. But when asked about ad monetization for AI overviews was super woolly and talked about, they were monetizing them at approximately the same rate as non-AI overview queries. Which means to me, if it's approximately the same rate, it must be lower because otherwise you'd say it was a better, you'd come out and go, we're monetizing better than we are before. So clearly they've only rolled that out to US, to mobile devices in the US, ad monetization, AI overviews. So again, what can we expect? Lots and lots of experiments, lots and lots of tweaking, lots and lots of adjustments to ensure that they monetize that to a greater extent than they're doing today to make more money.
Alan, you're in America. What's your lived experience of AI overviews when you're in search?
Oh, I mean, it's really not that hard to find, an absurd example of them getting something horribly wrong, and just in general, this is just my personal view. I have not found conceptually it to be super helpful. But I also recognize that, the thing that at one time was a search box isn't really there. I mean, the box is there, but almost everything behind it is sort of gone. And so we're really in a marketplace that is trending where the rest of the consumer base just needs to start to figure out that the place that they would go to find information is just no longer a thing. But that could take 5 years, 7 years, 10 years to really happen.
I wonder which is most frightening for publishers. Either the idea that they don't know how to work with AI overviews and they're not in control of their future, or an even scarier future that might be we're going to have to find something to do after Google. I think they're afraid of both of those things. It feels they're kind of under attack from all sides.
I think so. And really, if you think about it this way, there was a time not that long ago where the interests as between a user, a publisher, and Google were fairly well aligned. I don't want to overstate that they were perfectly aligned, but there was some alignment where, publisher does X, Y, and Z, Google rewards them with more traffic because users are happier because the publisher has made, the experience better for users. But that whole model, those three legs, all three of those legs, or at least two of them, maybe don't include Google there, two of the three legs to that stool are completely off now. And so the thing that was search is not a thing anymore.
Yeah. In the DOJ's opening to the antitrust trial, I think it was the second sentence they said this wheel's been turning in this business for 20 years and it's been turning perpetually in Google's direction. And that's kind of how you feel it is, by tiny increments, but it's always been going that way. So you guys know that as a journalist, I'm meant to like words, but I actually love numbers. And so it's party time for me. Every time there's quarterly earnings, I get a chance to go and dive into the numbers again. And I've become a massive enthusiast of the 10K, this really dry SEC financial document. You can find all kinds of stuff in there. It's great if you go and have a look. It's like my dog with a bone marrow. You want to get right in there and like kind of find this stuff. And so my broad analysis on big tech over all the 20 odd years that I've been following them now is that everything's ultimately about the money, even if it's hidden under 55 other layers of something else. It's always about the money. And so it'll talk about audiences, and it'll talk about agent engagement, and it'll talk about new products, and it'll talk about AI, and it'll talk about tech, and it'll talk about cloud. But at the end of the day, it all ends in dollars and cents. I think this is an American thing, Alan. It's not quite as strong as this in the rest of the world, but it's certainly true in big tech. And in this past quarter, Google's just reported $72 billion in ad revenue in the past quarter. Now, if you divide that by the number of days, that's $787 million a day. Okay. And that's up 12%. Now, we know already from the court cases that Google's a monopoly, so there'll be some changes in that. Okay. But these were pretty strong results, continuing to grow in a slowing market. Alan, did you have any takeaways from the numbers that you saw? Was there anything that leapt out at you in those numbers?
No, the number one thing that leaps out at me, but this has been a trend for a couple of years now, has been the gradual movement of ad revenue towards Google's owned and owned properties and away from some of the other services. That to me is the signal. So anything that, Google says a lot of things, and sometimes they speak cryptically, and they always speak with a nice Ted Lasso tone, but the thing to pay attention to is where the money is moving with Google, and it's certainly not moving in the direction of its publisher base.
No, it's flowing away. And I think for me, that was my major takeaway. So, Lawrence, this might be the first you've heard it, or maybe you know all about it. You can fill us in. But what we did was we had a really good deep look into the Q4 financials for Google. And basically, its advertising revenue falls into three distinct buckets. It has search ads, and we know that it's got an illegal monopoly on search ads, and that's already been decided, but that's its largest bucket, okay? And then it has so that was 54 billion. Then it has YouTube, okay? And YouTube did 10.4 billion this quarter, but 50 billion in ads last year. That was up 13.5%, and search ads was up 12.5%. I've got all the numbers on the wall here. I keep them live. But the third bucket is a thing called network, okay? And network contains all kinds of stuff. But basically, this is when Google's selling an ad for someone else. And if you work in the publishing industry, I'm not even sure you know that they sell anything else. I think in the publishing industry, you just think they sell your ads. And, in the office, the conversation is really simple. People are just throwing it into conversation. AdX and, GAM, it's just part of the office. That they sell our ads, right? That's the way it works. Except according to the latest data, they're selling less and less of those. So while all of its business grew, and those other two divisions, YouTube and ads on its owned and operated, to your point, Alan, Google.com pages, were both up by 12.5% and 13.5%. The network ads were down 4.1% in the quarter, okay, but they were down 28.5% year on year. So the share of the ads that it has in its pool that are being shared with publishers is down 28.5% in a year. And that's the second year of decline. The year before it was single digits, but 28.5 doesn't look like an accident. And it's not that there's less ads. The ads are still there. They're just going to different places. So that feels like Google's spiking the ad load and ad supply on its owned and operated sites and keeping the money, and sharing less with partners, calls them partners. It doesn't feel like a partner to be there. Shares less with partners, which means they're earning less money. So, Alan, you go first. That doesn't look like an accident to me.
Oh, it absolutely isn't. No, I think Google's I think Google's long-term plan is to not really have the network business. I think that's going to be, I've said for 3 or 4 years now that that's the first sacrificial lamb in any negotiated settlement with the DOJ or really any regulatory entity. And they're planning for that. I mean, that's really their, that's really kind of already factored in some level. And the irony is they actually now probably want to jettison it more than they did even a year or two ago, because as it becomes a smaller and smaller percentage of their revenue, it becomes much less plausible that it's really a give in the grand negotiation between Google and regulators.
All right, I need to get into that, because that goes to the jugular vein of the news industry, right? So if I'm taking what you're saying to be right, and thank you, because that's opened up quite a lot of thoughts for me, what you're saying is that Google has to continue to show growth as a business. It wants to grow in the areas where it's got the highest margin and the most control. And if it's selling ads on third-party websites, it has to pay publishers out of that share of money, which means it's naturally lower yielding. Lawrence, do you know how much a publisher typically gets paid on a Google DV360 ad?
I don't. I thought it was around about the 35% mark. I don't know whether you know, but
that rings a bell.
Certainly didn't know. I mean, it's interesting you picking up those numbers, because I picked up the network revenue was down 8 billion. 8 billion down in the quarter and 4%. But I hadn't really clocked the fact that it was 28.5% over the year, and obviously it was a decline on decline. And from what Alan's saying, it really does make sense. They are going to have to give some things away, and actually, why not? Make this look like an attractive package in a way that they're sort of disentangling their vertically integrated business by passing this off as part of a settlement with the DOJ. Get some good news headlines, and actually for them, meanwhile they can monetize more aggressively on search, YouTube, through charging for Gemini models, etc. So it's an interesting perspective. It's not something that we dig into too much, obviously, because we're so SEO focused. But for me, it'd be interesting to understand. And obviously, I don't know whether the 10K filing would have any of this kind of data. Probably not. But it'd be to understand whether traffic and price have remained static during that period, or even declined, or one or the other have declined, or whether it's just a question of it's just unlucky consumers are choosing Google's products over third-party websites.
I think people know me fairly well, and I think people know my cynicism towards Google fairly well. What I'm seeing here, if you view it from a helicopter down, is that traffic is declining because of AI overviews, and ad supply is declining because they don't care about it anymore. And if you're a publisher, that means your traffic and your revenue is going down. So if I'm sitting in the boardroom of a media company, I'm feeling pretty nervous today. Alan, is that about fair?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that you are no longer part of the product if you were a publisher. There was a time where you were, and those days are unfortunately past. And so if you're a publisher, you need to figure out your own distribution. You need to figure out your own, just way to continue a relationship with your user base. Because if you aren't able to do that, then it's just a matter of time.
So Alan and I, when we met after we'd been taken to a very swanky New York club. For I think what were we having? Manhattans, I think, wasn't it? So it kind of felt appropriate. It was, yeah, clearly the kind of place you and I would hang out all the time. And we were with the hyper powerful CEO of a very, very, very serious global media company, and the whole conversation was, "Advise me, please. Help me think about how we take this forward." And the conversation was, you've got to control distribution or you don't control your product. Yeah. You've got to control discovery of your product or you don't have a business, and you have to monetize your business and control the monetization of it, or you can't control price. Google has for the last 20 years controlled all three of those. And now it looks like it's saying, just not so keen on that anymore. Kind of done that. That's done. And we're going to let it go. And that has to be this time enough to make publishers realize that this is a one-way path to not very much at all from what's left. and having to try and find an exit ramp to do something else. Lawrence, are they showing any kind of gumption for that, or are they still just trying to find a way to optimize SEO?
Well, I think the jury's still out, really. I mean, I think it took a long while for people to wake up to the fact that this was happening at all. I mean, was it last summer? And obviously my LinkedIn feed was full of people lambasting Google for recommending people eat rocks or put glue on pizzas and things like this. And then everyone goes, oh well, they're never going to roll this out, to your point earlier. So I think I spent a lot of their time navel gazing and not necessarily thinking about how they capitalize on what they've got. But I do see brands and hear from brands saying they're going to invest more in their own apps. They're going to invest more in loyalty programs. They're going to perhaps paywall off some of the content. And then there's the whole thought around licensing their content and who they license it to and what terms, which is possibly a subject of another podcast altogether. I don't know, but so I think, I mean, obviously people have woken up, but they're not you don't know. I suppose that classic sort of drawing, you're at the end of this line and you don't know where it's going to go up or down. And I think people are, obviously hopeful that it probably won't be much worse than what they see today. But I just think this is the infancy of what we've seen today. If you were starting, if Google didn't have its core business and was starting as a tech startup, today they'd reinvent search in a way that's probably wouldn't look like it is today. Mm-hmm. And, at the end of the day, they're trying to help users find what the answers to what they're looking for. And often that answer is beyond information. It's actually completing a task. And that's where it's going to go. And they'll suck up all the publishers' content to help them work out what it is they need to do, and then use AI bots, browsers, universal agents to execute. Mm. And so the value in that sort of value chain, if you like, is the publishing content gets diminished over time, and a lot of the sort of publishing content, which is what should I say, sort of evergreen, doesn't change too much from year to year, is going to be devalued considerably. But when you're continuing to invest in news stories for related journalism, and the story moves on considerably, by the hour, that's when I think you've got tremendous value. And I think that's where publishers have got to be, trying to hold on to that data, and perhaps or charging such a premium for that data that it subsidizes the rest of their business.
Well, in fairness to Google, they're competing with companies who have sort of already moved into the post-search world. And so Google is in that sort of, they're in a Netflix moment where, Netflix V1 was a really interesting and well put together logistics company that beat the tar out of Blockbuster here. And that in of itself was sort of brilliant. But what's really brilliant about Netflix is that they then pivoted again into the streaming service that we now know. Google is right in the middle of the Netflix pivot, where they've got to figure out, how do we hold on to this revenue, which is why they're giving you all the smiles and hand waving and don't worry, everything is going to be fine view to the publisher, while recognizing that there are, at least a handful of companies out there looking to eat Google's lunch in this post-search world. And so they need to be cognizant of that, because otherwise they're out.
Yeah, I think you're entirely right. And I think that's a really good way of putting it. Lawrence, can I just ask, one of the things that you analysed that really is eye-opening to me the first time that we worked together on looking at AI views, which wasn't AI overviews then, it was SGE then, and the Google marketing people have been feverishly working away, and they've ended up with AI overviews. One of the things we saw, or in your data that showed, and I'd really love you to explain it a bit, is that there was almost a daily change in what we were seeing in the data that AI overviews was looking at or reading and responding to. So it looked like behind the scenes, there was an army of ants working on different versions of this to try and optimize it. And so I recall it was very news centric at the beginning, and then it kind of pivoted to other things and other things and other things. Has it stabilized now? And just talk everybody through that kind of journey as we were watching it kind of adapt to its environment.
Yeah, so when they first rolled out the SGE beta, I think, when was that? May 23, I think. And we did a study. I think our first study was in December where we analysed sort of branded keywords and e-commerce keywords actually. And then I think in March we did branded keywords and looked at the impact. So Google at that stage was showing a ridiculously high percentage of AIOs across almost all breadths of topics and type of results. So it was like 86.8%, if I remember correctly. It's on our blog. So and then 91% when it was e-commerce terms. So that was frightening to me because that was like, wow. If you either you need to be in that top AIO positions and you'll get all the clicks or a majority of the clicks, or you'll be nowhere. But obviously the data has since transpired that actually, as I mentioned earlier, the click-through rates are down. So we started to analyse different studies and look at different types of keywords. They were showing for brand keywords. They were showing for local keywords. They were showing for news keywords. And news summaries, top stories in New York, what's happening today in New York, UK headlines, and then specific things, like, I don't know, there was a tunnel under the synagogue in New York, and we were looking at that, and this stuff was updating all the time. So then that was quite frightening. And I think when we did our research with the Publisher Consortia in June 2024, we found 23.7% penetration of AIO views across those news terms. And we found significant impact, and I think the average pixel drop was it was 980 pixels or something like that, just under 1,000 pixels. Pardon? Yeah. So basically, boom, a whole page down. So I think when they've rolled out AI overviews, then had that negative feedback about, or even to Alan's point about all these mistakes people were making, they stepped back a bit and they literally narrowed the range of queries on which they returned results. But that has started to change. And over the last year, we've done a weekly benchmark for some like a study in the US, and we could see it sort of just peaking at 0.5% every week, the penetration growing. And so I would anticipate that they'll continue to grow. They're saying in their earnings call that they're going to broaden the breadth of queries, but they've obviously said they're answering new queries and more complex type of queries, and people are asking new things that they've never seen before. But ultimately, they can broaden it, and they can return a generative result for 99% of queries, and probably the 1% they wouldn't are things for porn and sex and gambling and rock and roll. I don't know. They're things that they may possibly don't want to actually have a summary. So for me, that's the big thing that's coming down the road, is that the penetration is going to be greater. I talked about it being in its infancy. We're just seeing AI overviews here, but actually, we've seen examples just recently of multiple AI overviews appearing. And again, they make you click the button at the moment, but in the search generative experience, there are large chunks of those AI overviews were returned automatically. And again, we're seeing them testing that now. So it's going to change considerably. And, you've seen integrations with Google Docs, experiments of saving it, exporting it. So they will continue to make experiments. They will continue to change the format and innovate and do so as well in response to this new generation of AI sort of search engines and chatbots that have reared their head and are looking for the first time, to the industry at least, that they actually might pose some serious competition for Google. So I mean, that's a sort of a potted history of kind of what we've seen with SGE. I'd say more recently. Last week, I published a study on AIO volatility, and we tracked about 10 or 11,000 keywords at 3 points, and it's sort of an 8-week interval, then again at another 4 weeks or so, 5 weeks, to get like a 13-week interval and see how the AIO results changed. And what we found was that the AI overview ranking pages changed faster and independently from the organic rankings. And there was only a slight correlation between, a change in organic rankings and a change in the pages that were ranking in AI overviews. And over that 13-week period, something like 70% of AI overview pages had changed. Now, that could be Google sorting out its product. It could be because, the nature of the queries meant that, things have moved on, the news cycle had moved on, or what have you, or there was more up-to-date information. But I think it's indicative of the rate of change in the SERP, full stop, what's happening this year, and how hard it is for brands and people who aren't looking at this full time like me to try and keep up with, what's happening in search. And that's just on Google, let alone, ChatGPT, Perplexity, DeepSeek, everybody else, and all these other consumer-facing AI chatbots. So, sorry, I mentioned Bing, of course, because Bing is still there. We're seeing, change, a lot of change, turmoil, and there'll be more of it. And we've got to be prepared for that, and be prepared to rethink some of our strategies, for example, in terms of how we market our brands, how we position our brands, how much we invest in organic channels versus paid. To make sure we get a leg up over the competition.
Alan, I'm going to come to you in a second because I want to talk to you about something on a legal front on this. But just before I do, I just need to, a publisher asked me just the other day, they wanted me to ask you this question, Lawrence, specifically e-commerce. So, for publishers that they're trying to reduce their reliance on advertising, they're trying to look at, doing direct sales and various other things, affiliate marketing, these kinds of things. They're also seeing those hurting. Are you seeing those in AI overviews? Is that also a monetary stream that's being sutured here by Google's behavior?
Well, I think those, certainly we saw 90% in SGE, 91% I think it was in March 2024, 90% of these e-commerce terms were returning AI overviews. So they haven't been to date. Their rollout has been much more measured and focused on more informational, commercial, but you can see where it's heading. So they are going to. I think affiliates have been hurt considerably already, and they could continue to be hurt because, at the end of the day, Google sees them as another sort of middleman between the original publisher and the customer, and they want to cut them out of the piece. So I don't spend a lot of time in the affiliate space, but I would be concerned in terms of the picture would look pretty gloomy, and I think it's going to be hard to add a lot of value. I've really got to pick your niches carefully to add value in that space. So the only other thing to say on e-commerce, apart from the fact it's my favorite area to research, full stop. So in a way, I would have liked to have more data to go on to now, but it's coming, is that we are, Google's rebuilt their Google shopping experience with, on their earnings call, they talked about it with generative AI from the ground up. I'm not quite sure what that means yet, but we're going to find out. We've seen changes in the Google SERP over the last year where they've been sort of putting these e-commerce sort of filters and facets, attributes down the left-hand side and taking people directly into Google Shopping when they've searched with an e-commerce term. And we've seen that in SGE. So we may see more of that in AI overviews now. And Google, trying to get people to convert, on Google rather than go to Amazon or anywhere else.
One of the things you want to keep in mind with respect to the affiliate space, and specific to attribution, is the game is not to help somebody drive sales. The game is to create the appearance of being able to help somebody drive sales.
Right.
And so if you happen to be the last entity who records a click in just about anybody's purchase funnel, that typically is you. And so really all Google needs to do to disintermediate the affiliate space is just to continue to make sure that they always are somewhere in there, one of the entities causing a click.
So, Alan, I've got a good question for you. I reckon probably the best job in Google right now is in the law department. They are run off their feet. There's a court case every 15 minutes on something of escalating seriousness. Here's a question for you. Maybe you guys know the number. ChatGPT told me the number was like 10 billion, but I was looking at what we thought the global market for SEO is, in terms of what's its market size. And this market has been generated and created entirely by Google. Didn't exist before Google, exists only really for Google. Every single publisher has a team of people in their office beavering away, working for Google on the publisher's tab, at the publisher's cost. all of them to try and drive up their appearance in Google so that Google can sell more of their ads. It's a really, really clever business model where everybody else pays for your profit. So my question is that given the amount of money that's been invested and the amount of effort that's been put in by everybody due to the explicit requests of Google to do SEO, and then the entire business that you're operating in is being subverted away to a different track that serves you another way, that has to have legal implications, doesn't it? I mean, all of these people have invested enormous amounts of money. And then it's becoming worthless every day.
It's a great question, but I think if you think about this from the perspective of when all this started, and Lawrence, you may know better than me, but it was at least years ago, maybe 25 or 30 years ago.
About 5 years with Overture and people like that, yeah.
And so, they created a marketplace that lasted for 2 decades. In internet time, 2 decades could be 2 centuries. And now that thing has come to an end, arguably to no fault of Google. Again, getting back to my point that there's external market pressures that are pushing them to do X, Y, and Z. So, look, I haven't thought about this a lot, but I would venture a guess that this would not make it into Google's top 100 legal issues right now. Because and now you have to separate the discussion regarding what's fair and what's unfortunate. I just a quick side story. I was the consumer privacy ombudsman in the General Motors bankruptcy back in 2008, and that meant, among other things, I was literally in court for 3 weeks, and as part of that process, they had to tell dealerships who had been in place for generations that they would no longer be in business as of 2 or 3 months from now, post-transaction. Horribly, horribly unfair. I'm not here to say it was any of this was the right or the wrong decision, but I am here to say that 25 years is a pretty good clip for just about anything. And, the reality, I think, is such that, in the same way that perhaps some of the coal miners would be better served to get a retraining, that perhaps some of the folks in SEO, would do well to, maybe there will be such a thing as AIO. And Lawrence, I'd love your take on that.
Well, I think there is already. But I'll just go back to the point about the business not existing before. I mean, I used to work in the Yellow Pages industry for Thomson Directories, the number 2 Yellow Pages with a small y in the UK. And, people would pay to get top of the listing in their category. If you wanted to be, top of the taxis, top of the plumbers, they knew that getting to the top would get you the most calls. And, that was in a day when people wanted calls rather than, online sales. But, companies used to change their names. You'd have AAA taxis, and then you'd have hash AAA quadruple A taxis or something, because they knew that changing their name would get them to the top of the book. And of course, that would be allowed if they paid, because then it was, once you've all paid the same, it was the one in alphabetical order. If Google arranged the SERPs in alphabetical order, I could tell you we would be called AAA Authoritas. But going back to optimization, so it really makes the point I'm going to make, which is someone has to be number one, right? Someone has to be the either the first choice, not necessarily the best choice, but the first choice. And that's human nature. We're all competitive at the end of the day, and someone will want to pay that little bit more, or put a little bit more effort in, or circumvent the rules to try and get themselves or their client to the top of whatever it is consumers are using, whether that's an AI search engine in a browser, whether that's a chatbot, device, some sort of device with, or an AI assistant. And, maybe there will be a future. It will be my AI assistant will be bribing someone else's AI assistant to get to the top for, for whatever query it might be. But, certainly, human nature hasn't changed, and the motives behind businesses haven't changed. And you talked about the big tech being money oriented, but so are small businesses. I mean, they thrive based on that phone. It used to thrive on the phone ringing. Now it's sales online or leads coming through, and they need to find a way to get their lion's share and of the business that's out there.
Amazing.
So, and my last point on that is in terms of optimization. I mean, we're building tools today to help clients. We're talking major brands, e-commerce sites, publishers understand their presence across AI search engines and large language models. So that's ChatGPT, it's Claude, that's Gemini, that's even new types of browser array, a search engine like the Arc browser, for example. Clients are interested in all of this because they want to understand how they're represented. They're really worried about hallucinations. And I've got some classic examples, which when we launch in a month's time, I'll probably share a bit more widely. But you can search some of these large language models for, I'm thinking of buying a family car, which brands should I avoid? That is not a list you want to be the number one on. That is not a list you want to be top of. And yet you can do that in every single category. And Gemini and others will recommend to you brands to avoid. So we're already helping, and there's a lot of agencies out there already helping clients understand this changing picture and giving them data to help them make good strategic decisions.
So as you're thinking about optimization, very generally, how important is algorithmic transparency to you, to enabling you to do what you do, a scale of 1 to 10?
I mean, obviously, every SEO would love to know the ins and outs of the Google algorithm, for example, or any other search engines, Bing, etc. I think it would be probably detrimental to the industry if they did, because then it would be widely known, and then perhaps the use case for using an SEO agency versus doing it yourself would be, or an SEO tool, etc., would diminish slightly. I think Google would make the point also that if they were much more transparent about how their algorithm worked, that then people would game it, and it'd be impossible to actually produce a good product. And I think that is true to a certain extent, but I do think they could be transparent about how it works without giving away the whole weightings of all their models, for example. But they could be much more transparent and forthcoming about the ingredients in the mix and what's important and what's not important. For years, they maintained that user behaviour wasn't important and wasn't tracked, but obviously the DOJ testimony has proven that they are tracking these kind of things, and of course they are, because you'd expect them to. And if you were running that business, you'd do the same. So a long-winded answer, but I would say, I mean, it's one of those ones where I'd probably sit somewhere in the middle. I'd like to know a little bit more and a bit more transparency, but I think they could be transparent about other areas as well. I mean, a great example is search volume data. Clients want to understand. I think they're the monopoly player in all markets worldwide, pretty much. So they have access to this great resource of what users are searching for and how often they're searching for these terms, and they've gone out of their way to make that data difficult to access on fair and reasonable terms that are non-discriminatory. Because now you have to be a Google advertiser to actually get accurate search volume data. Whereas, if you're not, they've changed the models so that you only get these search volumes, in big bands between 10,000 and 100,000 a month, which tells you nothing. So I think there's certain aspects to their business where they could be much more transparent and forced to, supply data, that's accurate on an open, fair and non-discriminatory basis, which would help the industry and help millions of small businesses make good decisions about what to do on their websites, for example, or what apps to build and where to build them. And that to me that's my number one pet hate, as you can tell. But the algorithm is up there, that's for sure.
That makes sense. I tend to come at these things from a privacy lens, and algorithmic transparency is a huge term in privacy circles these days. Although the context is a little bit different, because the fear in my neck of the woods is, what is happening behind the scenes where a consumer is being discriminated against in ways that they just don't fully understand. You're knocking on a slightly different, albeit important, door, which is, okay, well, how do we help our publishers understand what the, quote unquote, right behaviors are?
So that's a good segue to bring this to a close. So I've got two questions for you, for both of you. So the first question is, I think the general scuttlebutt across the industry is that Google search today isn't as good as Google search was 2 years ago. Okay, I think there's a view that the quality of the search results has diminished. Do you think the consumer product is on its way to being better, or do you think it's on the way to being worse? Lawrence, you first.
I think a lot of SEOs would echo your remarks and say that they think it's a lot worse. I'm not sure it is, actually. I think, personally, I quite like the generative results from a consumer perspective, because I tend to, it's just my nature. I tend to be trying to do things at 100 miles an hour and go very quickly. But a lot of people don't like them, obviously, and you can see Google's full of queries of people trying to turn them off and what have you. But I think most consumers don't care too much. They just want to solve that burning issue or that itch they've got at the moment. And if they were, if they could talk to the toaster and the toaster would solve the problem for them, they would. And it just so happens that we've been educated and sort of habitually use Google now. I think there's every chance that, other AI chatbots, AI search engines can steal a piece of market share from Google, because we're very used to using our phones, for example. The next generation, my kids are so used to, using voice search, publicly without shame on a train in England, which is obviously frowned upon by people of my generation. And, and so I think, we could expect perhaps finally a little bit of competition for Google. But I would say overall, I think the advent of generative AI into search, notwithstanding some edge cases and some obvious errors that they've made, is probably a step in the right direction. But as I said earlier, it's just in its infancy. Google, when it released their Gemini video, showed an example of a SERP where the user interface was created on the fly, with the AI model writing code to actually create the right type of user interface for the response. So if you think about that, where the user interface is so dynamic that it's changing in response to the nature of the user's question or follow-up questions or what they've said previously, then you've got a product which is so dynamic, that's moving so fast, that how do you regulate that? And maybe you need AI models to regulate it. I don't know, but that certainly muddies the water. But overall, I would say it's a small step still that's had a big impact. It's going to have an even bigger impact, and there's much bigger steps to come.
Net ahead, Alan?
Well, I tend to think it's behind, but I may be just a special case. So, my searches, for things like when is the next UConn basketball game? It's great. Who is who sang that song back in the 80s from the indie rock band? Also, perfectly fine. I tend to deal with a lot of legal concepts, and even as a general overview, that type of product offering is not really helpful. Hopefully, at some point, maybe it's LexisNexis or somebody, but somebody creates something that is valuable to me, because I can see a tremendous amount of value. And it's not even about being right all the time. It's about having an authoritative overview that sounds like you know what you're talking about, which in the places with the types of things that I search on, it's just more often than not, it feels like I'm getting a response from somebody who's just smoked way too much of the really good weed. So it's just not very helpful in that respect.
Sorry. So look, my net feeling is that I think that they've got the UX right. I think it's a great product. I think the user experience is terrific. I think the back end doesn't work, to your point, Lawrence. I think they're working really hard to try and make it more accurate and better. But I do think that they're going to eventually figure out that, as they worked out that Reddit was a really bad outcome for trying to use this, they're eventually going to figure out that premium publishers is a really good way to reach this result. And so I think that at the moment there's kind of a Mexican standoff. from both sides at the moment. But ultimately, they're stronger and better together for consumers than they are apart. That's my personal feeling, and I really hope that the two sides can find some entente cordiale in the middle and find some middle ground. My next question, I'll go to you, Lawrence, first. Is simple question: 3, 2, 1. What would you advise a publisher to do right now?
Well, I think they need to really start collecting data at scale to really understand the impact on their business. So, Google's limiting the information that's available around AI overviews through Google Search Console. But if you mash together the right kind of data, like AI rank tracking data with GSC data, you can pull out some insights that you haven't got today, and you can get a good sense of direction on where it's going and which categories, which parts of your business are going to be worse affected. And then you can also look beyond that at the new generation of AI search engines out there, the Chat GPTs of this world, the Claudes, the DeepSeeks, etc., and say, look, let's start to collect some data there as well, understand our competitive position, and start to think about where we allocate our resources to ensure that we focus on the areas where we can actually build some sort of defensive moat. And things like we talked about the story moving on quickly, that stuff's hard to get. You've got to pay to get access to that data. You've got to have journalists on the ground, and that's going to be hard for Google and others to replicate. So for me, it's about collecting the data and then applying that data to pull out the right strategy for your business and trying to build some defensive moats which you can defend and are less likely for substitution from AI.
Alan?
Yeah, I would tend to agree, Lawrence. I think I would look at it maybe a little bit differently, but maybe saying a very similar thing. Like there was a time when, if you look at a purchase funnel as a content creator, that the platforms, whether it's Google or Meta or whatever, was 90% of your purchase funnel. And I think today that it might be okay to use Spotify or whatever platform for discovery, but the sooner that you can bring a user into something that you own or control, the better off you are, even at risk of alienating a percentage of them along the way. Because if Spotify or Meta owns them, then Spotify and Meta owns them and you do not.
Yeah, and my take, for what it's worth on this, is that as soon as publishers gave up distribution, discovery, and monetization, right, they didn't have a business. And, I've heard so many publishers and bosses say to me, content is king. And I'm like, well, you must be absolutely loaded then, because that's what you do every day. But of course, they're not. They're not rich, are they? Which has to prove that that's not true. You can't just be the king in a castle and expect everything to work great. What you've actually got to do is you've got to figure out how to run the entire infrastructure of the nation. And I think that they dropped the ball on that. But what I do believe is that AI is a transitional point here. I actually believe it's a re-platforming of information. We went print to digital. I think this is the next one. This is digital to AI. And I think that the delivery and the discovery of news is going to increasingly be audio and visual. And so to your point, Lawrence, your kids are asking questions of the AI conversationally on the train. I'm having a 2-hour conversation with AI in my car and learning history, right? And so I think that, that for me is a game changer. So the person or the publisher, I hope, that can figure out what the UX is going to be for an audio visual content discovery and delivery future, and then the monetization of that, that's the next Google. And I think that's where the real fight is, for what it's worth. If you've got an idea, let's have the conversation about that, but not on air, because I'd rather just keep that to ourselves. So let's do that when the call ends. Look, thanks so much for coming. Is there anything anybody wanted to add? I'm happy, but was there anything anybody wanted to add at the end?
No, I'm just working on building an AI assistant at the moment that can help me get Liverpool Football Club tickets because my daughter wants to go and it's a nightmare. So that's what I need to do.
The slot machine is on fire.
It's great. We're big Liverpool fans, but getting tickets to see them is harder than ever. But it's easier to get to number one on Google. But so
you've both put your sporting allegiances in public here, and I know you're going to get blowback, so I'm just going to leave it. I'm not going to go there. I'm going to leave that to you guys.
Look, can I mention Wycombe Wanderers as well? Because they're my local team and no one cares about them.
Yeah, no, they're popular with both their fans. So, super duper. Great to see you all. Thanks a lot for joining in. And we will catch you next time.
Yeah, thanks, Ricky. Thanks, Al.
Thanks, Ricky.
Thanks for tuning in. The Future Media Podcast is a production of Future Media and Ricky Sutton.